Bonjour à tous. Après les événements d'hier, le concert, l'événement de ce matin, on ne sait pas où ça va s'arrêter. J'ai vu, en tout cas, j'ai observé quelque chose hier. Osservato, in inglese? In English? Oh, sorry. I observed yesterday during the morning that you were very keen on online conferences. And I was actually surprised by the impact of the second conference, even if it was transmitted, just a video without even the online contact with the poet. And I noticed that not only our Neapolitan friends, most of them were crying. Of course, they understood everything, but as well some of the other guests. So now we'll have another online conference. We are very sorry that our guest couldn't make it to let you know. John McCarthy, a philosopher from Washington. Nuncia will present him. It asks from us that we just open our hearts in faith and receive his teaching. Of course, it's a bit of an effort, but don't worry, tomorrow the Holy Mass will be in presence, whatever happens.
John McCarthy è un professore associato e decano alla Scuola di Filosofia della Catholic University of America. Si laurea al St. Michael College all'Università di Toronto. La sua ricerca è finalizzata nell'ambito della filosofia moderna. Nello specifico si concentra sulla relazione tra la ragione umana e la fede. Ha pubblicato una collezione di saggi sull'illuminismo e sulle regole della ragione.
You will see we have been taught since the beginning of our psalm by the Pope John Paul II to be attentive to all the aspects of human life, to sport, to music, to philosophy. Nothing is left behind, nothing is left outside of our interest, of our passion, of our experience. It's like a big recapitulation, big movement, attentive to man in Christ. And you will see that the philosopher John McCarthy belongs to this movement. He's a son, a disciple of John Paul II, of this movement. And he's actually in direct contact, working with Monsignor Melina, a true disciple of John Paul II. And I'm absolutely sure he will be recognized someday as one of the very big servants of the Church. So let us listen to his words.
Et voilà, mira. Oh. Maravilloso. Je veux vous donner un message. Enivrez-vous de vin, de poésie, de vertu, mais enivrez-vous.
Je suis très enthousiaste de cette édition et je souhaite à cette version française soit un succès.
Do you know them by heart? Do you know them by heart now? Let me remind you just one thing. It's very concrete, very simple. When you buy one of these books in a bookshop, the bookshop takes 40% of the price. When you buy it on internet, a big percentage of it goes to the transport. So actually you do a big favor to the editor when you buy it here. And for example, for the ones who need to bring them to their heart's home, use the opportunity now.
Good morning from the other side of the Atlantic. I've been asked to venture some thoughts of a philosophical sort about the ordinary human reality identified in English by the word home. Or since a home is only a home when it is actually occupied by living human beings, if only in memory or anticipation, I will offer a few remarks about the human significance of having a home and of being at home. In broaching this task, I face two very considerable difficulties. Precisely because it is so ordinary a thing, we may be confident that every human language has a word for it, and that every speaker of that language will know what the word means. Home is, we might say, part of the everyday vocabulary of human life, like the words mother and father. In fact, one meaning of the English adverbial phrase at home is to be familiar with, or to be well versed in some subject. For that very reason, one might well doubt that there is any need for a philosophical reflection on the meaning of home. What could be more tedious than a lecture purporting to instruct us in something we know perfectly well already? That's the first difficulty I face today. The second, oddly enough, is opposite in bearing, but works to the same effect. For although the meaning of the word home is not in the least obscure, whatever your own experience of life in a home is, or has been, you can be sure that in countless ways, it's unlike anyone else's. And for a very straightforward reason. The home is the normal setting for many of the most intimate and personal actions and interactions of human life. In the humanly most important sense, no two homes, we can safely say, are ever perfectly alike. But for that reason also, it is again hard to see what philosophy could add to our understanding. Because the reality of domestic life is at once so utterly common and extremely personal, a philosophical reflection on that same subject seems doomed to trade either in banalities or presumptuous ignorance. I shall do my best to avoid this impasse, with what success you will naturally be the judge. The following consideration emboldens me. I have characterized the home as an ordinary human reality. It is ordinary in the sense that there's nothing unusual about the fact that homes exist and that human beings live in them. Any given home may be unusually large or unusually beautiful or so forth. But for those who have a place to call home, being at home is easy to take for granted. Or rather, a considerable part of what it means to have a home is to have somewhere to go to that you can take for granted, such that you can count on its being there to receive you whenever you are away from it, and need expend little or no effort to settle into once you are again back there. On the other hand, a home is precisely the sort of thing that one ought never to take for granted, for it is obviously a very good thing to have, as we are reminded when we begin to miss being at home after a long stretch away, or when we encounter some poor soul camped out under a bridge, or when death or divorce deprives us forever of the home we once had. In what follows, I too shall attempt to provide a modest reminder of the goodness of home, though not, I hasten to add, by making any further references to the sadnesses of life without one. What I shall try to do is to describe, albeit in a very partial and provisional way, how it is that life in a home makes human life possible. I hope, in other words, to show something of the goodness of being at home as such, whatever one's own experience of it, by showing how the home secures our common humanity. Although it is often used metaphorically, a consideration we shall have to return to in due course, the word home primarily designates a corporeal reality, and more specifically, a built structure, to invoke the language of architecture. Howsoever different one home is from another, every home has been fabricated from some constellation of materials, organized in such a way as to provide for an interior space, itself involving various structural elements, along with some sort of protective shell or skin covering it either partially or in its entirety. Every part of this structure will have been fit together in such a way as to make the whole thing resilient, although only for a time, to the array of physical forces at work in its environment that sooner or later will reduce it once again to a disorganized heap of stuff. It will have been humanly conceived, at least in part, in response to a variety of bodily human needs that are common to any number of other living organisms, and to lend to us some of the resilience we have built into the house to the same physical forces pushing and pulling upon it. In short, we naturally dwell in homes, first and foremost, because we are animals, which is why it is instructive to begin our discussion with a very brief comparison of our own dwellings with those of other creatures. From a biological standpoint, it might appear as though our homes are the social equivalent of clothing, an artful compensation for our comparative vulnerability or nakedness. So conceived, they would enable us to endure together any number of natural hardships that other species manage without art or human ingenuity by virtue of their woolly coats or talons or horns or fleet-footedness or various other natural endowments we ourselves lack. The reality is not quite so simple. No animals fashion clothes for themselves, it is true, but any number of non-human animals do build structures of various sorts, some of which are at least analogous to human habitations. According to one prominent biologist working in the field, structures built by animals serve three principal functions: to create a protected home, to trap prey, think of spiders' webs, and for intraspecific communication. For example, the elaborate displays fashioned by male bowerbirds to attract a mate. What this author means by home is, quote, a secure refuge protected to some degree from the physical hazards of extreme cold and heat and the biological hazards of predators. He readily admits that most such structures are very modest in character, though he adds that, quote, like our own homes, unquote, they sometimes provide some additional features in addition to shelter from the elements and protection from predators, such as food storage, waste disposal, and even food production areas. Among the subhuman home builders he identifies are a very few species of reptiles, amphibians, fish, mollusks, and crustaceans, a small number of mammals, a somewhat greater number of spiders, many species of insects, and most birds. the urge actively to shape some small region of the physical world, using some portions of it in order that we be able to conduct our lives more securely within it, is by no means original with us. Indeed, it's not outside the bounds of possibility that our remote ancestors learned a thing or two from watching some other animal builders. Before I proceed any further, however, I must introduce a small, but I think important correction to the picture I have just sketched. Following Darwin, biologists and the general public alike are usually quick to explain features and functions of living things in terms of what is called survival. What is called a struggle for the survival either of an individual organism or of the species of which that individual is a member. We should, I think, be a good bit warier of such explanations than we are. Consider the lodges and dams of Eurasian and North American beavers. Such truly splendid constructions plainly do enable these most accomplished of all mammalian builders to live where they do with relative security from hunger and predation. It is clearly not the case, even so, that the fabrication a beaver is justly renowned for is merely something it does by the way, such that once its work is completed, it then can go happily on with living a beaver's life. The construction of lodges and dams is not merely an elaborate survival mechanism designed to overcome various challenges to a beaver's existence. If it were, we could not exclude the theoretical possibility that there existed a still more effective mechanism waiting to be discovered that would enable the beaver to secure its continuance. Building lodges and dams is rather a part of what it means to be a beaver, indeed a very large part at that. It is simply what beavers do, always and everywhere. Were beavers somehow to learn to elude hungry wolves, say, by climbing up the trees that they so assiduously chew down, they would at once cease to be beavers. So it is also with our home building. By sheltering us from a variety of natural harms, our homes manifestly contribute to our survival. Who could doubt that? Even from a strictly biological standpoint, however, they are not merely instrumental. They are not the sort of things we would happily do without were only our circumstances more favorable. We are home builders and home dwellers because we are human beings. In our being at home, we both live out and live up to the unchanging terms of our humanity. What is it then that makes a home a home? From a purely physical point of view, it is not so easy to say. For unlike the constructions of other animals, ours involve a remarkable range of materials. Whereas most bees build with wax and most birds with twigs or grass, we have resorted to pretty much anything we have found at hand: bones, straw, reeds, wood, sod, felt, animal hides, adobe, and stone, and a great deal else besides: brick, glass, and an ever-increasing list of complex synthetic materials. The sizes and shapes of our dwellings also eclipse, in their manifold differences, the variety of constructions fashioned by other species. And unlike their built structures, most of which are suited for life in a single biome, ours have helped us to make ourselves at home in forests and jungles, swamps and deserts, rolling grasslands, alpine slopes, and tropical atolls. We build our dwellings above ground and partially below it, on stilts over water and high aloft in trees, clustered together in massive groupings or set off from others in lonely isolation. With the invention of teepees, tents, yurts, houseboats, and caravans, we have even found ways to build homes to move with us. we can take a certain pride in our versatility of builders, though not at the price of ignoring the architectural achievements of our fellow creatures, some of whom manage, even without a central nervous system, to organize material drawn from their surrounding environments into astonishingly intricate arrangements. Nor should we forget that howsoever grand our own dwellings may be, they still attest to our susceptibility, as Hamlet puts it, to the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to. We build because we are corporeal buildings, subject to countless bodily needs. To take those needs seriously is to acknowledge that there are insuperable limits to our capacity to put down stakes in the world. So far as we are concerned, most of the planet is uninhabitable. An ocean trench is no more suitable for a homestead than is the slope of an active volcano, or a cave a mile underground, or a Himalayan peak, or the middle of a polar desert, to say nothing of anywhere else in the solar system. So various are the dwellings we have fashioned for ourselves, however, that one might wonder whether it really makes sense to call them all by the same word, homes. How very different life must have been for Louis XIII at the Palace of Fontainebleau from a life in a Huron longhouse, as described by St. John de Brebeuf. Is there any common denominator to such disparate structures? To answer that question, it is helpful to recall that homes themselves constitute but one class of structures among the many that we have devised over the centuries, along with barns, workshops, marketplaces, army barracks, assembly halls, theaters, and temples, to name only a few. What sets a home apart from all the rest is that its scope is, I'm going to say, comprehensive. Whereas other human structures are built in view of some one specific kind of human activity, or some particular state or phase of human life, every human being is qualified for occupancy in a home at any time, no matter his age or work or social standing, because it is there, especially, that our physical needs are most commonly met: shelter, nourishment, repose, and other such things. But since we cannot really be ourselves except in the company of others, as our capacity for language attests, it's natural that we should help each other to address even the needs we have as individuals. All the more so is that true insofar as we have a natural appetite to generate others of our kind. So it is that homes are where children are normally begotten, born, and raised, where those who are ill normally recuperate, and thanks to the ties of affection that are forged over time, where those most advanced in years normally breathe their last. Following the philosopher Aristotle, then, St. Thomas Aquinas defines the home as, quote, nothing other than a certain community established in accord with the nature of things for everyday life, which is to say, for those actions that must be performed daily, close quotes. Louis XIII was as much subject to everyday human necessities as any Huron villager, at least in that regard. Fontainebleau, then, has no greater claim to having been a home than was a longhouse in Upper Canada. What makes the home a truly human reality is the way in which its human occupants assume responsibility for the claims their domesticity makes upon them. Nowhere is that more evident than in the preeminently domestic activity that is the rearing of children. With us, as with every other member of the animal kingdom, it takes a male and a female to make another member of our kind. But if we limit ourselves to purely physiological considerations, the work required of them is not especially demanding. In fact, human conception only occurs after the joint efforts of male and female have concluded, possibly within minutes of their sexual congress. But in any case, without their awareness, the woman becomes a mother and the man a father. Carrying to term the child they conceived will make very considerable physical demands on her, but a mother's task begins humanly in earnest with the child's birth, as does that of the father, provided that he acknowledges his role in the child's coming to be and does not emulate the males of almost every other species whose generative efforts end even more quickly than they began. The joint labor involved in setting their child securely, though never with absolute certainty, on the path to adulthood will stretch out over many years. A human being is physically more dependent on adults than other animals, and for far longer. But that is not why the work of fathers and mothers is so demanding. Although the child must be fed, sheltered, and protected from bodily harm by his parents, what he chiefly requires from them is an education broadly conceived in his humanity. Parents have to teach children to be human beings. This is why Pope Paul VI called mothers and fathers the preeminent educators of their children. In so characterizing the task of parents, the Saint Pope was only giving voice to common opinion, an opinion confirmed by the nearly universal practice of humankind over the course of recorded history. To be sure, many powerful voices nowadays claim otherwise. But since their claim against biological parents, so-called, rests almost exclusively on propaganda campaigns, political diktat, and violence, or the threat of violence, we may, for present purposes, disregard it. But what does any of this have to do with our present concern? If the preeminently human task of parents is to help their progeny discover who they themselves are, it follows that the home must be understood as the place wherein children receive their first, and in some respects, most fundamental lessons in their humanity. At least for long as children dwell within it, then, the home can fairly be described as a kind of classroom. And this in its entirety, for there is not a single interaction the children have with their parents anywhere in the home that is not, for better or for worse, educative in some way. Lest this depiction of domestic life be construed in an overly scholastic fashion, I hasten to add that the education in question need not ever involve the use of books, the existence and common availability of which is a very recent phenomenon in human history. Indeed, only a small portion of a father's or a mother's pedagogical energies will be communicated expressly in verbal teachings about this or that. In their capacity as educators, mothers and fathers have always imparted a good deal of local lore or doctrine, especially as their children have grown older. They have also sought to pass on various skills needed by their children to make their own way in the world. Yet, insofar as homeschooling, to call it that, in the most important sense, originates in the parents' love for their children, which is to say, in actively advancing their children's good, as they understand it, for the sake of the children themselves, then above all else, what parents communicate in the home is an understanding of and a habitual commitment to what they regard as the right way to live. Precisely in their role as teachers, parents will do what is in their powers to enable their children to embrace for themselves the way of life most conducive, in the parents' eyes, to their children's happiness, to their children's flourishing as human beings. You may rest assured that I will not essay even the most schematic account of such an education. I shall here make do with a highly condensed summary of a single lesson in the curriculum of homeschooling always and everywhere, namely, how to eat in a human way. That children are naturally endowed with an appetite for eating goes without saying. It also goes without saying that, barring any grave congenital problems, children will also develop on their own the capacity to digest the food they eat. What does not go without saying is that children, when left to their own devices, will learn to eat properly. Eating properly does not mean, according to the etiquette observed at Buckingham Palace. It means to eat in a way that befits a human being, as distinguished from some four-legged creature. Initial instruction in this subject will likely require at least some tutelage, even in the mechanics of eating, so that the child be led to chew thoroughly what he might naturally be tempted to wolf down. It will also include cultivation of the child's taste for dishes forming a part of the family's cuisine that the child initially finds distasteful. If eating utensils be a part of the child's cultural inheritance, rehearsal in their use will certainly form part of the syllabus, as will extensive drilling in the customs and courtesies that both reflect and foster an awareness that some deference is owed to the other human beings with whom we eat. In this and in other ways, family meals become occasions for the child to exercise self-restraint, a virtue that has obviously great relevance well beyond the dinner table, or wherever it is that the family assembles to eat. At the same time, parents must teach their offspring to savor the food in their mouths, to linger appreciatively over it, which, with a little additional prodding, should induce in them a spirit of gratitude for it, and possibly also an awareness, howsoever rudimentary, of God's bounty. And as if this course of instruction were not already demanding enough, children must also be taught, ever so gradually, to share words as they share food in thoughtful conversation. Then, at long last, has the necessity that compels the human animal either to eat or to die been fully humanized. Only then do we eat as human beings ought to eat. One small but vital part of domestic activity, then, is brought happily to an end on the day that feeding their progeny finally gives way to dining with filial interlocutors. My more general point is to repeat that in order to understand what a human dwelling is, one must examine the kinds of activities that characteristically take place within it. Eating is certainly one such activity, and in eating we are undoubtedly addressing a need that falls to us as living organisms. What domestic life makes clear, however, is that the home's contribution to our continuance, though inseparable from the facts of human physiology, cannot be reduced to them. Although we would not live in homes were it not for our animate corporeality, human domesticity enables us to attend to purely physiological necessities without requiring us to put our humanity on hold, as it were, while we do so. Rather, life in a home enables us to meet our bodily needs while doing those needs one better, by meeting them as truly human needs in a fully human way. At home, we do not just eat to fuel up so that we might then go on living human lives. At home, eating becomes, or rather ought to become, for nothing about the humanization of our lives is ever automatic, it becomes a dignified expression of our common nature. Eating becomes such an expression at home, especially because, as I have been arguing, mothers and fathers take on the responsibility of teaching their children both how to eat properly, and why it is good to do so. Who else is going to take the trouble? Admittedly, we also humanize the nutritional demands that our bodies make upon us when we dine out in a restaurant, or go on a hunger strike, or fast, or engage in one of the corporeal works of mercy by feeding the hungry. The home's contribution to such noble human activity is expressly to provide the foundational lessons for the next generation of diners, lessons that serve as the indispensable condition for the future survival of humanized eating. Something similar might be said about the way life at home seeks to transform our other animal, as it were, needs. In sum, even, or rather especially as regards our most primal urges, it is not possible to live a human life entirely apart from home. To this point, I have said next to nothing about the human significance of a home as a built structure. I begin with the most obvious fact about it. In its occupation of some space, a human habitation secures for us a foundational sense of place. When a policeman urges an angry crowd to go home, everyone knows what he means. He is instructing them all to go back to the place from whence they came. Home is the paradigm of a return destination because it is the paradigmatic point of departure, the paradigm of what it means humanly to have a place in the larger scheme of things. In that way, one's home anchors one's sense of direction, temporally and spatially. To see how, imagine yourself traveling through some vast, uncharted region of the world. If you had no idea of your original starting point, you could never know how far you had gone, much less where you were now or where you were going. Or rather, you would not really have gone anywhere. No matter the distance you had traveled, you would only have been wandering around aimlessly, without a destination, without a point of departure. One's first home, wherever it happened to be located, provides us with a point of reference for charting our way through life, and not just physically or geographically or temporally, but also psychically. For a child can only acquire a sense of place, which is to say, a sense of belonging somewhere or another, insofar as he becomes aware of who he is. Without knowing who he is, he won't have a sense of where he's going or where he came from. And yet he'll only have that sense if he's welcomed lovingly into the place he calls home by those from whom he came to be, namely his parents. Only in such circumstances can the child look upon the place where he began as his own point of human departure. The absence of a loving welcome into the world at the beginning of his life will put a person in peril ever afterward of being and feeling out of place and at a loss, a being and a feeling that no GPS can ever remedy. Wherever it was that we first called home is what provides us with the coordinates for knowing from whence we have come and where we currently are, as also, in some measure, where we're headed. A still more fundamental structural feature of every home, though one clearly tied to its being located somewhere or other, is the distinction a home affects through some physical boundaries, such as walls or a fence at the limits of its property, between what lies within the home and what lies outside of it. The significance of that distinction in lived experience is again as much psychic as it is physical. and not only because what counts as domestic space is not always contained or limited to areas contained by walls and a roof. Think, for example, of courtyards, barnyards, gardens, walkways, and car parks. They're not indoors. Insofar as our homes shelter us from animate and inanimate factors in our environment that would harm us, inside does primarily mean indoors. But humanly speaking, the most salient realities within a home are the human beings who dwell therein. It's not a spatial issue. These human beings require, in turn, not just living space, but also an assortment of things in which their domesticity finds material expression. The furnishings, for example, associated with everyday life: chairs, tables, bed, cooking instruments, crockery, bedding and drapering, and so forth. Ornaments intended to lend grace to their common space. Items such as mementos, heirlooms, and portraits, whose function is to remind those residing within of their ties to other people in other homes. And possibly also in the home, in this space, are devotional objects meant to recall to them their religious obligations. Yet life within a home also involves any number of things, such as I've just mentioned, and in addition to its human occupants, that are not really things at all. Think, for example, of the nicknames and peculiar terms of endearment that families often use when they are together privately, but would not utter in public, or the cherished memories they hold in common. All these things are part of life in a home. They're part of the inside of home life. Conversely, a home will also include any number of realities within it that no one regards as part of the home, such as the sunlight that streams through the windows or the termites that might happen to be nesting in its walls. What is secured in a humanly relevant sense by the notional space containing life within the home is, in short, everything that those whose home it is regard as their own things exclusively, and not anyone else's things. We typically prefer our own things to the things of others, and often enough to things that might, by any independent measure, be rated better than ours. This is to some extent as it should be. Mothers and fathers are supported in the sometimes rather draining demands their newborn makes upon them by the affection they naturally have for the child. And the origin of that affection is not some particular quality or set of qualities that makes their newborn child physically or morally, intellectually superior in some way or another to any other infant crying for adult attention. Every mother and father looks at the newborn child as the best baby they could ever imagine having. Parents are naturally fond of their own progeny in the way that mothers, bears are of theirs, as many ancient writers have noted, Aristotle among them. Aristotle also pointed out, however, that most people are bad judges concerning their own things. The exaggerated pride parents will sometimes take in even the most pedestrian or worse, morally dubious achievements of their offspring is a stock example of the poor judgment often enlivening our fondness for what belongs to us. Natural and even necessary though it is, the preference we have for what is ours, a preference for our own things, can, if left rationally uncorrected, have quite disastrous consequences. Aristotle was especially concerned with damaging effects of human partisanship on political life, effects of a sort that are all too evident to the people of Ukraine. In view of the occasion, however, I would like to consider a way in which exaggerated affection for one's own undermines human domesticity itself. In his Home, A Short History of an Idea, the architect Witold Rybczynski provides an engaging survey of the way the sense of what a home is and should be has evolved in the Western world since the Middle Ages. The thesis of the book is twofold: that over the last several centuries, the notion of comfort has played an ever more prominent role in human design, and that architectural attention to comfort is a very good thing. Rybczynski's principal target in the book is what he characterizes as the, quote, fundamental poverty of modern architectural ideas. The most famous, or perhaps infamous proponent of which was the Swiss-French architect known as Le Corbusier. In Towards a New Architecture, first published in 1923, Le Corbusier had prophesied that modern home design should be governed by what he called the principle of mass production and of large-scale industrialization. Because the home, rightly understood in his judgment, is, and here are really famous words, a machine for living in. Rybczynski's antipathy for the spirit of social engineering driving so much of architectural modernism is, I think, surely justified. It would also be hard to quarrel with his defense of domestic comfort. Is there anyone here, or there where you are, opposed to indoor plumbing after all? Still, it is possible to have too much of some good things, and comfort is one of them, as the philosopher Remy Brague has argued. Even if feeling comfortable generally means feeling at home, and it does, our conception of comfort captures, Brague says, only a very small part of the word's original signification. The word to comfort derives from the Latin comfortare, meaning to strengthen or to give courage. Not what you usually think when you sit in a soft chair. So that comforting another originally meant helping that person to face tribulation by bearing it courageously. Nowadays, though, comfort signifies a total lack of tribulation, as Brague points out. The result is a domestic economy that tries to, as Brague puts it, forget the outer world in favor of a feeling of coziness and security. The ideal of domesticity as a safe and soothing, relaxing, if you will, escape from the claims reality makes upon us, the image that we forge for ourselves of the ideal of such a home is a vast and lavishly appointed estate situated in some idyllic corner of the globe, far removed from the rest of humanity. Evidence of the widespread theoretical appeal of this ideal, it's an ideal, of course, because exceedingly few of us will ever be wealthy enough to own such a place, is how frequently images of it appear in the dreams manufactured by Hollywood. The fantastic locations of all James Bond's enemies. That even the grandest examples of that ideal proved to be horribly parochial in Brague's sense explains perhaps why so often they go on the marketplace only a very few years after their owners have first acquired them. People spend millions and millions and millions of dollars on places, on their dream homes as they call them, and only 5 years after they're built, they're looking for some other dream home. not much of a dream. Moments ago, I pointed out that a home involves an inside and an outside. What makes up the inside of a home, humanly speaking, is everything that its inhabitants regard as uniquely theirs. From that point of view, outside means everything else. Now, because no household is perfectly self-sufficient, every home dweller must be prepared to quit his home, at least for a time, and make his way out into the wider world. Having a way out, and therefore also a way in, is thus a structural necessity for every home. Before concluding my remarks, I would like briefly to describe two ways in which the home's threshold can serve to correct the human tendency to misconstrue the significance of one's own things. Any human structure fit to be called a home should also be fit, in some measure, to welcome over the threshold human beings who do not themselves reside there. To have a home is to have an abiding opportunity to practice hospitality. On one end of the spectrum of hospitable gestures is a host who welcomes someone into his home in order to rob and kill him. A wickedly self-serving deed that is an act of hospitality in appearance only. On the other end is the Book of Kings' widow of Sidon, who, nearly at the end of her rope, offers the prophet Elijah the last food she has, though she knows virtually nothing about him. Most human acts of hospitality fall somewhere between those two extremes. But all genuine acts of hospitality require the host to sacrifice something of his own comfort, that word again, so that his guest be at his ease. And although guests are rarely complete strangers to their hosts, even the family friend we invite to our table does not belong entirely there with us as one of our own, as a member of our own household. Truly, to welcome another into our own domain requires, furthermore, that we do not impose our own terms upon him, but rather let him be himself as someone else, as someone who's not a member of our house. Somewhat paradoxically, then, hosts are hospitable to the degree that they strive to treat the guest as though he were one of their own, precisely while recognizing that he is not. English idiom is here very telling. Hosts do not say to their guests, "We will make you be at home," but rather freely invite the guest to make yourself at home. No matter how great is the sacrifice of their comfort for the guest's sake, however, hospitality is not an act of selfless duty. In seeking to make the guest feel at home, they do not abandon the pursuit of their own good for the good of another. They're not altruists. They identify what is good for their guest, rather, as their own good. Also, the guest is good for me to have in my home. Now, hosts must have a confident sense of their own in order then to be good guests, for otherwise they will not have anything to welcome their guests to. Still, in welcoming another into their home, they also enlarge, if only for a moment, the scope of what they will count as their own. Their guest for the moment is one of ours. And in doing that, they thereby advance their own good by transcending it. In the act of opening up their home to others, hosts actually will start to feel at more home themselves in their own home. Hospitality then helps to insulate life at home from the harm that dwelling there would otherwise do to their common life, were they to have closed in upon themselves. Being at home can also be protected from a distorted sense of its own importance when we venture out into the wider world, provided we do so in the right way. And the right way is going to turn out to be the opposite of the way of a robber, for example, who wants to grab anything he can, or the way of a tyrant or an imperialist. What's the right way? Well, it's possible to leave your home without leaving it behind. To explain what I mean, allow me to quote from an authorial side appearing in Daniel Deronda, the final novel of the British novelist George Eliot. A human life, Eliot writes, should be well rooted in some spot of a native land, where it may get the love of tender kinship for the face of the earth, for the labors men go forth to, for the sounds and accents that haunt it, for whatever will give that early home a familiar, unmistakable difference amidst the widening of knowledge. At 5 years old, mortals are not prepared to be citizens of the world, to be stimulated by abstract nouns, to soar above preference into impartiality. The best introduction to astronomy is to think of the nightly heavens as a little lot of stars belonging to one's own homestead. A child, Eliot observes, is incapable of thinking about the outside world with the supreme detachment often thought to be prerequisite to scientific objectivity, or with the neutrality that self-styled global citizens make their boast. For a child, everything he encounters outside the home naturally has reference to his domestic preferences and preoccupations. His attachment to his own things is what awakens his interests in things further afield. If he didn't have a home, he wouldn't be interested in the things out of doors. It is true that children will sometimes misconstrue something new to them in an anthropomorphic way, as we say, when, for example, they attribute feelings to inanimate objects. And this we sometimes think endearing, but evidence that children are a little stupid. Then again, the scientist also tries to make sense of what he does not understand by appealing to what he does. That's what children do. And the scientist in this is certainly no better off than the child. Indeed, he is in a much worse way if his abstract theorizing renders him incapable of doing justice to his own humanity. A child doesn't forget himself in the way that seeing the trees outside leads him to forget what he loves. Possible for us when we're scientists or global citizens to do so. When a child looks up in wonder at the stars, he does so because he understands that they somehow have to do with him, and hence that he somehow has, that they somehow have to do with him, and hence that he somehow has to do with them. That is why Eliot suggests that the child's attachment to his own is the best introduction to astronomy. It is also why the child's way of engaging the wider world promises an experience of being at home far richer than the Epicurean worship of domestic comfort to which Bragg is rightly opposed. The child, as he makes his way into the world, isn't so much eager for comfort as for greater understanding of things. He enriches, therefore, his home by bringing greater wealth into it, by understanding. Some brief concluding remarks. Throughout my discussion of the domestic order, I have tried to keep in sight the undeniable kinship between human homes and the home-like constructions of various subhuman animals. My focus has been, accordingly, on the home as the seat of what is sometimes referred to as the biological family, which is exactly the kind of home that most home dwellers have lived in over the course of human history. Given how prominent is the place of home in human experience, it is no wonder that the word home has found a variety of other uses. For example, people will sometimes use the word to refer, rather loosely, to the place where I happen currently to be residing, where I'm paying rent at the moment. Although when in other contexts they speak of going home at Christmas and mean by that another place entirely, no one has any trouble understanding what they mean. They understand that where I pay rent is not really home. We also use the word to designate a whole range of institutions, each of which shares some features of a home in the strict sense, although we also add a qualifying adjective to signal our awareness of the differences between them. Thus, we have, in English anyway, children's homes, maternity homes, retirement homes, soldiers' homes, and so forth. In addition, and as I acknowledged at the outset, the word is frequently pressed into metaphorical service to name things we do not really regard as homes at all, for which the word nevertheless seems apt, such as the home plate in baseball, from which every batter starts and to which every successful batter returns if he scores a run, or the United Kingdom's home fleet, which defends the homeland. Such usage poses no difficulty for any speaker. We all know what the words mean. There is, however, one metaphorical use of the term that requires special mention, namely, when it serves to designate the place to which we are bound after we die. What exactly is that place, and where is it? English usage provides no settled answer to such questions. At times, home means, in this context, the grave, as in the word the poet Milton puts in the mouth of Adam in Paradise Lost, when Adam tells Eve that their lives will end, quote, in dust, our final rest and native home. In a similar vein, the psalmist says of those who trust in their wealth that their graves are their homes forever. At other times, however, the home in question is where God is said to have called a person at the end of his life, a signification that also has scriptural warrant. Here, home means not the grave and unending death, but heaven and a new life. It is not difficult to see how, in this context, the same metaphor could function in two ways so sharply divergent. Whatever it is that the home in question is, and wherever it is located, that place is entirely beyond our capacity to comprehend, and for an obvious reason. I cannot conceive of where I will be after I die, because I cannot think of myself as being anywhere at all after death, any more than I can conceive of myself as existing before I was born. That is, I can imagine, but in imagining myself after my death, I'm not dead. And imagining myself being before I was born, I'm imagining something I wasn't. That we should name the land most unknown to us after the place most familiar is more than a little strange. I'm not so presumptuous as to venture an explanation for that strange usage. I conclude instead with an anecdote. When he was around the age of 6 or so, our first son asked my wife one day whether our home would be in heaven. She looked at him very tenderly and then answered in what she supposed to be a suitably equivocal way. Everything that we love in this life will be in heaven, she assured him. Pressing the point, he added, and our garden? She again responded with the same deliberate blend of vagueness and of confidence and vague generality. Anything that is good on earth will be ours in heaven, she said. Still not satisfied, he insisted, yes, but will this house be in heaven? And this garden, will it be there? Now, when my wife, in recounting this exchange to me later that evening, reached this point in the story, I found myself at a loss to know just how I should have answered had I been the one subject to our son's grilling. Indeed, I still am. I don't know what I would have said. Nevertheless, I think my wife did very well to answer him as she then told me she had done. Without a moment's hesitation, she responded, "Of course." She did well to answer in that way because our son was right to love our home as he did. Because he was right also to sense that as good as our home was, it would not last forever. Because he was right to wonder how our home could exist in its passing goodness forever if there were not some abiding home for our home to be in, some home still better and still more real than our current home. And because he was finally right to confess by putting his question to her that he did not understand how to put all these things together for himself. In responding to him as she did, my wife simply confirmed, or affirmed, as a mother must, the evidence before his own eyes. Thank you.
Now, thanks to the miracle of modern technology, I hope we will manage to see John, and I hope he will see us, even if it's 5 o'clock in the morning at his place. So, let's pray it works.
Okay.
I think I will just, if you don't listen good enough to what the people will say in the microphone, then I will tell it again, try to translate.
Okay.
Thank you so much that you're here, because it's somehow 5 o'clock in the morning in Washington, isn't it?
Yes.
Oi. Did you drink a good coffee?
Pas encore.
Okay.
Merci beaucoup, d'abord, je parle trop fort. Merci beaucoup pour ce formidable C'est un formidable exposé. J'ai une question, c'est que je voudrais vous demander, qu'est-ce que vous pensez de l'intrusion de la télévision, des écrans dans le foyer, puisque finalement c'est le monde qui rentre dans la maison. Qu'est-ce que vous pensez de ce phénomène qui vient un peu
C'est
perturber?
difficile d'entendre parce qu'il y a un écho.
Yeah, I will tell you in English now. I guess I could say it in French, but I have to speak English for the whole public. Thank you so much for this wonderful conference. What do you think of the invasion of screens inside the home? Because it's like the invasion of the outer world coming in the heart of the home.
Yeah. Not a good thing, but something we must live with and manage. Yeah, especially for the very young, it's you have a tremendous amount of money and technology poured into these things, which make possible this strange event now, on the one hand. So you're in my home. You and Latino are, in a certain sense, in my home. And I'm happy to have you. But a lot of other things come into the home through these screens that are not good, that are very bad. So I think we should be very cautious about them, which is to say the obvious.
Tal cual.
I suppose another thing that occurs to me.
Uno, Steffi. Uno.
Yo le quiero preguntar, ¿por qué piensa que hay una continuidad entre la conducta de los animales y el actuar humano? Si hay uno que hable bien inglés y castellano.
Okay, why do you think there is a continuity between the behavior of animals and the actions of human beings?
Why do I think that? Because there is. We are, after all, animals ourselves. We're not angels. Of course, we're very different from the other animals. But they show us a lot about what life is. We share with animals the fact that we're part of this great thing, which is to be alive. And our lives as human beings are tied up with their lives. We could not be without them. So they help us to understand ourselves. Now we can misunderstand ourselves too by looking at animals. But even to see that we are unlike animals is something that animals teach us, after all. So with eating, it would be wrong of us to eat as animals eat. On the other hand, we share with animals that we eat. They don't drink coffee, but they do eat.
Un, deux. Steph.
Hola. dentro de tu experiencia, ¿qué es lo más difícil en la construcción de un hogar? Ya que hablaste del hogar, del hogar humano, lleno de susceptibilidad. Yo lo veo, por ejemplo, en la construcción de un nuevo hogar, de un matrimonio, de una familia, que cada uno carga el hogar de origen, ese retorno a la casa primera. Y hay como una cierta fragilidad del hogar como un encuentro de hogares. Entonces, de este punto de vista, si existe alguna dificultad o es una gracia, ¿qué piensas?
Okay, so a new question from Felipe from Chile. He asked, he said, what were for you the biggest difficulties in building your own home? Because Felipe said he noticed that when two people come together in a matrimony and begin to build a home, then of course they bring with themselves their own home, their own primal experience, like you said, and it's bringing with it a weight of tensions and susceptibilities. So is it, yeah, he concluded, is it a grace or is it an obstacle?
Tout est grâce. The saints say, I hope we can live to say that too. The greatest obstacles for me are my sins. For my wife, her sins. For our children, their sins. I don't know what to really say to that. We live in a difficult time. There's no question about that. But then every age has its difficulties, and you can look at other ages and think, oh, nobody had problems like we have problems. But that's probably not so. Every time has a drama that it has to contend with. And anyway, this is the time God put us in. He wants us to live now, not some other time. And life continues to be good. So, I must say, the home is not it's not everything. Every home will pass away. And if a home bears fruit, it bears fruit in other homes being formed. I wish I could be there to hear the theological reflections on home. But heaven isn't just home. It's a new city. I mean, the Jews look forward to Jerusalem, and we to a new Jerusalem, which is a city. It's not just a home. So homes too have to be places of sacrifice, of self-donation, and every human home will come to an end sooner or later. So I wish I could answer your question better.
Bonjour monsieur, merci pour votre exposé, Cyriac du Luxembourg. J'ai une question un peu dans la continuité de la précédente. Vous avez parlé du foyer comme le lieu où la progéniture est arrivée, donc comme en fait, comme on accueillait le foyer, on le recevait. Mais on voit bien que l'homme quitte son foyer pour en fonder un autre. Quand, ou y a-t-il une décision à cette origine, ou un événement dans la vie, ou qu'est-ce qui fonde vraiment le moment où il y a un nouveau foyer qui se crée?
Syriac from Luxembourg, he says, you said in the conference that actually somehow we found a home, but we receive a home because we receive our children. So in your eyes, what is the precise moment? Is it a decision? Is it a gift of the foundation of the home?
For each of us, most human beings, anyway, we can speak about most human beings, are born into homes. Sometimes tragically, those homes turn out to be places of great division and sorrow. That was not my experience. There were sorrows, but I was born into a home in which I was loved and embraced and raised. And on that basis, then, yeah, I received a home. I don't think any of us, the best we can do is receive a home, and welcoming the gift of a home, then maybe our own lives can be a home for others. So even with children, so my wife and I were blessed to have 3 children who are now adults and on their way. Our oldest just got married, so she's starting a new home. She got married in June. Your own children are an astonishing gift. Sometimes you don't see that, but often you do. So I guess, I suppose most of our work is to accept what has been given. To ponder it, to try to understand it, to embrace it, to serve it, to share it. Yeah, of course, we all have the grace of the life in the church. A priest I know, a student of mine, recently observed that one gift we have in this time is the gift of, we've been given is the gift of clarity. And I think he means by that we can see things that everybody should be able to see, that now strangely many people don't see anymore. They've lost the capacity to see the obvious. There's I forget the title of the book by Chesterton, but the book concludes that there will come a time when Christians will be persecuted for saying that the grass is green and the fire burns. Well, I think in ways we're living in that time right now. to say that a child really needs a mother and a father, that I think is obvious. But sadly, for many people, that's no longer obvious. So, yeah, that's a gift. It's a gift to see the goodness of what we've received. And in affirming it, I think we help other people to see it too, if they've stopped being able to see it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John. We will now follow the rhythm of our meeting. So go on with the coffee pose.
Male.
I don't know if you will have a coffee or go back to bed, but
I don't know yet what I'll do myself. Anyway, thank you, everybody. Bon séjour.
just 2 words. Thank you so much, because I know you prepared this conference in the middle of the turmoils of the end of the academic year, and then during the preparation of the first wedding in your family. So thank you, really, thank you so much, and welcome next year, who knows.
Just a few more moments of attention. These are very important announces. So I don't know, maybe you can also record and send to your WhatsApp group or the people who are not here. Maybe you can do a recording of that. Sorry? No, I will say only in English. So this is, normally you have the translation, and my English is quite French, so. So you have seen that this year we could have invested for the quality of the festival. We had a fantastic team for the sound, the lights, many things have been invented to offer you a nice festival. All of that as a price. So please, we know that there are still people who have not been registered and they have not paid the festival, like many people. So please, for the ones who haven't been to the desk and not only take the badge, but also paid the festival, please go now. There will be a last chance tomorrow, but please, it will be really helpful if we can have all the participations now. It's also a huge effort for this village to receive us. Maybe you cannot imagine it, but for a village of 500 people, to welcome 500 people at home, because there is no hotel in this village, it's a huge effort. So please pay also your Airbnb the nights. I know that some of you have already given the money to the owners. Some of you don't know how to do, so now there is a table for all the questions about lodging, Airbnb and the price, and how you could participate with Genael outside. So please, it's the last opportunity for us to settle this problem. So please go and do that during the break. We know that last years there are people who have left without paying, not because they are bad people, but they forgot. And so there are some houses that has been closed to us this year because of that. So if we want that the festival continue, please be very attentive. Try not to forget this dimension. Sorry? And yes, the second point is please let the house as clean as possible, because there are private houses. Some of them open this just for the festival, just for you. So if you can let a little message to thank the people who received you, if you can let the house clean, if you want to let a little gift for them, really it's a part of the thing being at home in their place. The last important announcement is about transportation. Most of you have booked some shuttles. So if there are changes in your flight, in the way of leaving Letino, there will be now for half an hour Gaëtan and a little team for all the questions about transport. But we cannot accept people in the shuttles tomorrow that have not registered for that, because we have booked the shuttles already. So please check that you all have a mean to leave Letino. Please check your mail. Please be sure that you have registered for that, or if something has changed, you have to settle it now, because tomorrow it will be impossible for us to change the plans. There is also so now you can have the coffee with the young people of the Alpha Center, and you can book your restaurants for the lunch, the dinner. Tomorrow the lunch will be offered by our friends of Letino for all of us on the square after the Mass, after the Holy Mass. So for tomorrow at lunch there is no problem, but for today you still have to book. There is also the possibility to help the festival buying some souvenir, as we say in English. There are many postcards, bags, t-shirts. The quality is excellent, the prices are interesting. So if you want to help concretely the festival and bring a little gift home for the people who can go home, please feel free. So have a good break, and see you in half an hour here for the second conference. And please let your device out when you go out. Let your device, because the conference is another language. So you keep your earphone, but you let your device, that will be changed for the next conference. Thank you.